Before we begin, I want you to ask yourself something. Have you ever felt like saying no made you the villain in someone else's story? Like the moment you put yourself first, even gently, you were met with guilt, tension, or silence? If so, you're not alone. One of the most common ways people lose their peace is by confusing being agreeable with being respected. In this first part, we're going to explore how guilt can be used, not to connect, but to control. How people can twist kindness into obligation. And how your inability to say no isn't a character flaw, it's a survival strategy you may have outgrown. But you don't have to live like that anymore. So let's dive in. Part 1. They make you feel guilty for saying no. Let's start with one of the most manipulative tactics out there, guilt. Not the kind that comes from doing something wrong, but the kind that's carefully planted in you by someone who doesn't want to hear the word no. These are the people who treat your boundaries as an inconvenience, the ones who sigh heavily, roll their eyes, or say things like, "I thought I could count on you," the moment you decline their request. And suddenly, you're the bad guy, not because you did anything wrong, but because you dared to prioritize yourself. This is where it begins, the erosion of self-respect disguised as kindness. You think you're just being generous, that you're keeping the peace, that helping others is what good people do. But when saying yes becomes a reflex and saying no feels like a betrayal, you're not helping anymore, you're being used. Stoic philosophy reminds us that our time, our energy, and our choices are sacred. Epictetus said, "No person is free who is not master of himself." And being a master of yourself means being able to say no without explanation, without guilt, and without allowing someone else's discomfort to dictate your decisions. I've been there. I've said yes when I meant no more times than I can count. I've let guilt push me into commitments that drained me, into favors that felt more like obligations. And every time, I paid a price, not just in time or energy, but in self-respect, because deep down, I knew I was betraying my own needs just to avoid the sting of someone else's disappointment. But here's the truth. Guilt is not proof that you've done something wrong. Sometimes, it's just evidence that someone else expected you to abandon yourself for their benefit, and you didn't. And that's not selfish, that's clarity. There's nothing noble about always being available. There's nothing admirable about running yourself into the ground to meet someone else's expectations. What's noble is knowing your limits. What's powerful is honoring them. And what's truly admirable is when you can say no with grace and not crumble under the weight of someone else's reaction. Because when you constantly say yes out of guilt, people don't love you more, they respect you less. They come to see your kindness as weakness, your generosity as access, your silence as permission, and slowly, you start losing your own voice in the noise of other people's needs. The Stoics teach us to choose principle over pressure, to act not from fear or guilt, but from alignment with our values. Saying no isn't rejection, it's protection. It's the quiet act of choosing yourself when the world keeps asking you to hand yourself away. So the next time someone makes you feel guilty for saying no, take a breath. Notice how their disappointment is trying to crawl under your skin. And then remember, your time is a limited resource. Your peace is not up for negotiation. And your boundaries are not something to apologize for. They're something to be proud of. Because when you stop letting guilt control your choices, you start living a life that belongs to you, not to the expectations of others. And that is where true respect begins. Part 2. They only reach out when they need something. Let's talk about one-sided relationships, the kind that feel more like transactions than connections. The kind where the only time your phone lights up with their name is when they need a favor, a handout, or a quick fix to a problem they created. You scroll through your message history and realize something uncomfortable. Every conversation starts with, "Hey, can you?" or "I need your help." And suddenly, you're not a friend, you're a resource, a tool, a backup plan. It's subtle at first. They flatter you, make you feel important, say things like, "You're the only one I trust," or "I knew I could count on you." And of course, you show up, because that's who you are. You're reliable, you're kind, you want to be there for people. But over time, something shifts. You notice they never check in unless there's something they want. They never ask how you're doing unless it's a warm-up for a request. And deep down, you start to feel it, that quiet ache of being needed, but never truly valued. Stoicism teaches us to be useful, but not to be used. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." That includes being someone who gives from strength, not from depletion. It means recognizing when you're giving out of guilt or habit, rather than genuine alignment. And it means seeing the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Not everyone who smiles at you is for you. Not everyone who leans on you deserves to. I used to justify these one-sided relationships. I told myself they were just busy. That maybe they didn't know how to show appreciation. That maybe they were going through something. But at some point, I had to face reality. Relationships that only move when you move them? That's not a connection. That's a drain. That's emotional labor without reciprocity. And here's the thing. Being available to others is not the problem. Being exclusively available to people who vanish the moment your usefulness fades? That's where the pain begins. Because slowly, it chips away at your self-worth. You begin to wonder if people like you, or just like what they get from you. You begin to ask, if I stopped showing up, would they notice? Would they care? That's a brutal question, but it's a necessary one. Because it helps you separate genuine relationships from strategic ones. It helps you protect your energy. And most importantly, it reminds you that you are not a service. You are a human being. And you deserve more than just being somebody's emergency contact when their life gets hard. So how do you deal with this? You don't need to cut everyone off. But you do need to pay attention. Observe patterns, not words. Do they celebrate your wins? Or only show up for your labor? Do they disappear after they get what they want? Do they offer support when you need it? Or does the line always go one way? Real respect is mutual. It flows in both directions. And when you start showing up for yourself as much as you do for others, something shifts. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop bending over backward for people who won't even meet you halfway. The next time someone reaches out only when they want something, pause. Ask yourself, is this a request, or is this a pattern? You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to step back. You're allowed to ask for the same care you give so freely. Because when you stop giving access to people who only take, you create space for people who give back. And that's not selfish, that's sacred. Part 3. They don't respect your time. Time is one of the few things in life you can never get back. You can rebuild your finances. You can restore your energy. But the hours you give away? They're gone. And when someone consistently disrespects your time, they're not just being disorganized, they're showing you exactly where you stand in their list of priorities. You may not want to believe it, but it's true. How people treat your time is a reflection of how they value you. At first, it's small things. They show up late. They cancel plans at the last minute. They ask for just a quick favor that turns into hours of your day. And each time, they smile, shrug, and say, "You're cool with that, right?" And because you want to be agreeable, because you don't want to seem uptight, you say yes. Again, and again, but with every yes, a little voice inside you gets quieter. That voice that says, "Hey, this matters, you matter." Stoicism teaches us to guard our time like treasure. Seneca said, "People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy." And that's the paradox. You wouldn't let someone steal money from your wallet, but you let them steal hours from your calendar like it's nothing. Why? Maybe because you were taught that being flexible is polite. That patience equals virtue. That if you push back, you'll seem selfish or difficult. But let's be clear, there's a difference between being flexible and being disrespected. One comes from mutual understanding. The other comes from habitual disregard. I used to over-accommodate everyone. Rearranged my schedule. stayed longer than I wanted, said yes when I was already overwhelmed. And the worst part? I thought I was being kind. I thought I was being the good one. But the truth is, I was just teaching people that my time was negotiable, that their chaos could take priority over my peace. And once people learn that, they don't stop, they only lean in harder. Respecting your time starts with you. It starts with how you speak about your schedule, how you enforce your boundaries, how you handle lateness, overstepping, and emergencies that somehow always fall in your lap. When you value your time, you teach others to do the same, not through arguments, but through action. You start showing people what's acceptable and what's not by how you respond. It's okay to say, I only have 30 minutes. It's okay to leave when someone keeps you waiting too long. It's okay to decline an invitation that was made last minute and expects you to drop everything. You don't owe constant availability to anyone. And anyone who makes you feel guilty for honoring your schedule is someone who was never really interested in honoring you. The next time someone treats your time casually, stop and ask, would they do this to someone they deeply respect? If the answer is no, then don't accept it. You don't need to raise your voice or create drama. Just start reclaiming the minutes, hours, and energy you've been handing out too freely. Because your time isn't just a number on a clock. It's your life, and no one has the right to waste it without your permission. Part 4. They always play the victim. There's a certain kind of person who never seems to be at fault. No matter what happens, no matter how messy, unfair, or one-sided the situation is, they always find a way to make themselves the victim. They twist the narrative, they cry louder, they deflect accountability with phrases like, I was just trying my best. Or, no one understands how hard it is for me. And at first, it pulls you in, you empathize, you offer support, you excuse the behavior, because who wants to kick someone who's already down? But over time, something shifts. You start to notice that the pain they talk about is never something they learn from. The apology you hope for never comes. Every conversation feels like walking on eggshells, because if you speak your truth, they'll collapse into drama, tears, or silent treatment, and you begin to realize they're not trying to heal. They're trying to hide, behind guilt, behind sympathy, behind the manipulation of being the one who's always wounded. Stoicism teaches us to look at reality as it is, not how someone wants us to see it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, if someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake or thinking, I'll gladly change. It's the truth I'm after. But the person who always plays the victim, they're not interested in the truth. They're interested in avoiding responsibility. Because responsibility means facing themselves. And that's what they fear most. I used to have people in my life who wore pain like armor. No matter how gently I brought up an issue, they'd flip the script. Suddenly, I was the attacker. They were the wounded one. And I'd leave the conversation feeling confused, even ashamed, wondering if maybe I was too harsh, too demanding, too unkind. That's the power of the victim narrative. It hijacks your clarity and replaces it with guilt. But here's the thing. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. You can hold space for someone's pain without allowing them to use it as a shield from accountability. You can care without carrying. And you can support someone without sacrificing your own emotional well-being. When someone always positions themselves as the victim, what they're really saying is, I'm not responsible for what I say. I'm not responsible for how I hurt you. And if you try to hold me accountable, you're the bad guy. That is not vulnerability. That is manipulation. Real vulnerability says, I messed up. I'm sorry. It says, I want to understand how I hurt you. It invites conversation, not control. And if someone in your life consistently uses their suffering to avoid growth, that's not someone who's trying to heal. That's someone who's trying to trap you in their loop. You are not cruel for walking away from someone who refuses to take ownership. You are not heartless for saying, I can't keep doing this. Because here's the truth, playing the victim is a choice. And so is refusing to participate in it. The next time someone tries to guilt you by collapsing into a puddle of blame and sadness, ask yourself, Is this pain, or is this a performance? And if it's a pattern, protect your peace. You're allowed to be kind and clear. You're allowed to set a boundary, even with someone who's hurting, especially with someone who's hurting others in the process. Because real strength isn't in fixing people who won't fix themselves. It's in choosing not to be pulled under by someone who's mastered the art of drowning with company. Part 5. They use guilt as a weapon. There's a difference between someone expressing how they feel and someone using how they feel to control you. Guilt, when used honestly, can be a mirror, but when used manipulatively, it becomes a leash, and some people know exactly how to pull that leash to get what they want. They don't need to raise their voice or make demands. All they have to do is make you feel bad for being human. You say no and they say, "Wow, after everything I've done for you, you speak up for yourself." And they respond, "I guess I'm just the villain now, you ask for space." And suddenly they're the one hurt, heartbroken, betrayed. It's not direct, it's not always loud, but it's sharp, and it works, because you care. Because you don't want to hurt anyone. Because you've been trained to prioritize other people's feelings, even at the cost of your own well-being. I know this dynamic all too well. I used to feel crushed under the weight of other people's guilt trips. Even when I did the right thing for myself, I'd lie awake wondering if I should have handled it differently, if maybe I was too harsh, too distant, too cold. But eventually I learned, guilt, when used as a weapon, isn't about your behavior. It's about their control. Stoicism teaches us that emotional clarity is power. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In other words, be willing to disappoint people when you choose your truth over their manipulation. Be willing to be misunderstood if it means being free. The person who weaponizes guilt often does so with precision. They know your triggers. They know your empathy. They rely on your emotional intelligence not to connect with you, but to corner you. And the worst part is, it can make you question your own goodness. You start asking yourself, am I the selfish one, when all you did was make a healthy choice? Here's the truth. Guilt is not always proof of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's a side effect of breaking an unspoken agreement, that you'll always put them first. And when you stop doing that, they panic. They push back, they tighten the leash. But you are not responsible for managing someone else's expectations, especially when those expectations are built on control, not connection. So how do you handle it? First, recognize the pattern. Notice when guilt shows up not as feedback, but as force. Ask yourself, is this person asking for understanding, or are they trying to make me feel like the bad guy? Then, reclaim your clarity. You can be compassionate without caving. You can validate someone's feelings without surrendering your own. You don't owe endless explanations for why you said no. You don't need to apologize for choosing rest, space, or boundaries. And you definitely don't need to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's emotional script. Guilt loses its power when you stop accepting it blindly. When you start checking in with your values instead of their reactions. When you say, "I hear you, but I'm not responsible for how you feel about my boundary." The next time someone tries to guilt you into compliance, pause, breathe, and remind yourself. Love does not demand emotional submission. Respect does not require self-abandonment. And guilt is not the currency of healthy connection. You don't have to carry someone else's discomfort just to prove you care. Sometimes, the most caring thing you can do is to let them feel it. And let them grow from it, without you sacrificing your peace in the process. Part 6. They dismiss your feelings. There's a certain kind of wound that doesn't come from yelling or insults. It comes from silence, from being brushed off, from sharing how you feel and being met with a shrug, a laugh, or worse, nothing. You open up, and they change the subject. You say, "That hurt me," and they say, "You're overreacting." You try to explain your experience, and they roll their eyes or sigh like you're being dramatic. And slowly, you start questioning yourself, not just your words, but your entire perception of reality. This is what it feels like to be emotionally dismissed. And it's one of the most insidious forms of disrespect. Because it doesn't scream, it erodes. It chips away at your confidence in tiny moments until one day, you don't trust your own voice anymore. You start editing your emotions before they even reach your lips. You bottle up your truth to make other people more comfortable. And you begin to believe that maybe your feelings are too much, too messy, too inconvenient. But here's the truth. Your feelings are not a problem. They're data, they're signals, they're human. And anyone who routinely dismisses them is not protecting your peace, they're protecting their control. Because the moment you believe your emotions are invalid, you stop challenging the behavior that caused them. You fall silent, and silence is the space where manipulation grows. The Stoics taught us to master our emotions, not to erase them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." But tolerance doesn't mean allowing others to steamroll your emotional world. It means being grounded enough to notice when someone is using dismissal as a shield, and strong enough to stand your ground anyway. I've been on the receiving end of emotional dismissal. I've heard the phrases, "Don't be so sensitive. You're imagining things. That's not what happened." And every time, I shrank a little. I lost a bit of my voice. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. And for a while, I confused their lack of reaction with maturity, when really, it was avoidance dressed as logic. Real maturity doesn't dismiss. It listens. It seeks to understand. It makes room for discomfort instead of shutting it down. And the people who respect you will want to know how you feel, even if it's hard to hear. Especially when it's hard to hear. So how do you protect yourself from this kind of dismissal? First, you remember that your emotions are not a debate. They don't require approval to be valid. You are allowed to feel what you feel. Second, you stop over-explaining to people who have already decided not to hear you. You stop begging to be understood by those who benefit from misunderstanding you. And third, you set the standard. If someone consistently brushes off your emotions, you reduce their access, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because respect isn't just about how someone treats you when you agree, it's about how they respond when your truth makes them uncomfortable. The next time someone tries to downplay your feelings, pause, notice the pattern, and say to yourself, "I don't need you to agree with how I feel. I just need you to stop pretending I don't. You're not too much. You're not too emotional. You're not making it up." And the moment you stop accepting emotional dismissal as normal is the moment you begin to reclaim your voice. Because being calm doesn't mean being silent. Being strong doesn't mean being numb. And being stoic doesn't mean you have to endure emotional neglect with a smile. You deserve to be heard, even if the only one listening is you. Part 7. They make you feel incompetent. One of the quietest ways someone can gain control over you is by making you question your own abilities. It doesn't always happen through direct insults or obvious criticism. Sometimes, it shows up in subtle corrections, in backhanded compliments, in jokes that sting a little too much, in the constant suggestion that you're not quite enough, not smart enough, not capable enough, not strong enough to stand on your own. And over time, it starts to work. You hesitate before speaking up. You second-guess your choices. You ask for permission instead of owning your voice. Because they've done what they set out to do. They've planted a seed of self-doubt and watered it just enough to keep you dependent. It's manipulation dressed as just trying to help. It's dominance disguised as concern. They'll say things like, "Are you sure you can handle that?" Or, "You always forget the details." Or, "I'd just feel better if I took care of it." And at first, it sounds like support. It sounds like love. But what they're really saying is, "I don't believe in you. And I don't want you to believe in you either." Stoic philosophy teaches us that confidence doesn't come from ego. It comes from clarity. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And being master of yourself means learning to trust your own reason, your own choices, your own experience, even when someone else is trying to make you feel like you're always one step behind. I remember working with someone who constantly corrected me in front of others. It wasn't blatant, it was subtle, but it was constant. If I made a decision, they'd challenge it. If I offered an idea, They'd gently suggest something better. If I succeeded, they'd point out the one thing I could have done differently. And eventually, I stopped offering ideas at all. I convinced myself that maybe they were right, maybe I really wasn't as capable as I thought. But then I realized something important. People who genuinely want to help build you up, they do it without taking the ground out from under you. They offer support without making you feel small. They guide without dominating. And those who constantly undermine you, they're not mentoring you. They're managing your self-worth to keep you within reach. When someone makes you feel incompetent, it's not always about your skills. It's about their need to feel superior. It's about control, not contribution. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more you start confusing their voice with your own inner dialogue. You hear their doubts every time you try something new. Their judgments echo in your head whenever you make a mistake. And your confidence slowly erodes, not because it wasn't there, but because it's been chipped away piece by piece. So how do you fight back? Not with confrontation, not with defensiveness, but with awareness. Start noticing when someone's words leave you feeling smaller, not stronger. Pay attention to how often you leave interactions with them feeling less than. And most importantly, reclaim the space inside your mind that they've tried to rent for free. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to grow without being constantly reminded of where you fall short. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise is not leading you, they're limiting you. The next time someone makes you feel incompetent, pause, ask yourself, is this feedback, or is this control? And then remind yourself of everything you've done to get where you are. The battles you've fought, the things you've built, the courage it takes to keep showing up. You are not defined by someone else's doubt. You are not here to shrink into someone else's idea of humble. You are here to grow, on your terms. And when you begin to trust your own competence more than their commentary, you'll rise beyond their reach. Because self-respect begins the moment you stop waiting for someone else to validate your strength, and start remembering that it's always been there. Part 8. They constantly take without giving. One of the clearest signs that you're being taken advantage of is when a relationship, friendship, partnership, even family, turns into a one-way street. You give, they take. You reach out, they respond only when it's convenient. You show up when they need something. But when it's your turn, there's silence, excuses, distractions, and over time, you start to feel like a vending machine for emotional labor. Insert energy. Receive nothing. At first, you tell yourself it's just a rough patch. That maybe they're overwhelmed. That good people give without expecting anything in return. And yes, generosity is noble, but giving without receiving? That's not generosity. That's imbalance. That's self-betrayal dressed up as selflessness. Stoicism reminds us that giving must be rooted in clarity, not in compulsion. Seneca once said, "He who gives only for a return loses the grace of the act." But that doesn't mean you must accept being drained. It means your giving should come from freedom, not from fear, not from guilt, and not from the hope that maybe, just maybe, they'll finally reciprocate. I remember a season in my life when I was everyone's sounding board, everyone's shoulder, everyone's motivator. But when I needed someone, no one asked, no one checked, and the worst part? I didn't say anything. I convinced myself that it was fine, that I was strong enough to carry it all. But strength isn't about enduring imbalance. Real strength is knowing when enough is enough. When the relationship is no longer a connection, it's a transaction. And the currency is your silence. The danger of always being the giver is that you forget what it feels like to receive. You normalize emotional depletion. You tell yourself this is just how life works. Some people take, and some people serve. But that's not Stoic wisdom. That's martyrdom. And it's unsustainable. People who respect you won't just take from you. They'll notice your needs even when you don't speak them. They'll reciprocate without being asked. They'll give, not because they owe you, but because they value you. And if you look around and realize the giving only goes one way, that's not a relationship. That's a drain disguised as a bond. So how do you shift that dynamic? First, Get honest. Look at the pattern, not the exception. One kind gesture once in a while doesn't cancel out a consistent pattern of emotional taking. Second, stop filling every gap. Let people show you how much effort they're willing to give when you're not the one carrying the load. And third, build relationships that feel like breathing, not bleeding. You're not here to be someone's battery pack. You're not here to be appreciated only when you're useful. You're here to build mutual energy, to share growth, to give and receive in equal measure. The next time you feel taken for granted, pause. Ask yourself, am I choosing to give, or am I being expected to give because that's what I've always done? And then decide, not from guilt, not from history, but from alignment. You are allowed to pull back. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to let others carry their share of the emotional weight. Because relationships built on respect don't need reminders to give back. They just do. Part 9. They manipulate you with flattery. Not every compliment is genuine. Sometimes, praise isn't praise at all, it's a tool, a hook, a setup for control. Some people don't flatter you because they admire you. They flatter you because they want access to you. They know exactly what words to use, how to stroke your ego, how to make you feel like the smartest, most special person in the room. And the moment you lean into it, the moment you lower your guard, they start asking for favors, pushing boundaries, rewriting expectations. Flattery is different from sincere appreciation. Genuine words of affirmation lift you without expecting anything in return. But manipulative flattery always comes with strings. You may not see them right away, but they're there. Hidden beneath smiles and sweet talk is a quiet agenda to win your trust just long enough to get what they want. Stoic philosophy warns us against being too easily moved by either praise or criticism. Marcus Aurelius said, "Don't value what doesn't come from your own soul." When your self-worth is too dependent on the opinions of others, especially the glowing ones, you leave yourself open to being played. You become vulnerable to those who have no intention of honoring you, only using you. I've experienced this firsthand. I've had people sing my praises in rooms full of others. Tell me I was the only one who could help, the most reliable, the one they truly trusted. And at first, I felt honored, seen, respected, but over time, I realized that the compliments were carefully placed bricks in a pathway that always led back to their needs. And when I finally said no, the flattery disappeared, so did the respect. Because it was never real. It was just leverage. People who use flattery as manipulation are often very good at making you feel indebted to their admiration. They create a version of you that feels hard to live up to. And you start performing for that version. You start saying yes to keep the praise alive. You start feeling guilty for not living up to their exaggerated image of you. That's not confidence. That's captivity. So how do you tell the difference? Pay attention to what happens after the compliment. Do they respect your boundaries? Or do they gently push past them? Do they praise your independence and then ask you to sacrifice it? Do they celebrate your strength until you use it to say no? Stoicism teaches us to anchor our value internally, to be flattered neither by praise nor wounded by insult. Because when your confidence is rooted in your own principles, no one can buy it with pretty words. And no one can shake it when those words disappear. The next time someone floods you with flattery, pause. Listen not just to what they say, but to what follows. Ask yourself, do I feel seen, or am I being softened? Flattery that is sincere doesn't need to be excessive. It doesn't make you uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like bait. You deserve to be appreciated, not as a tactic, but as a truth. And you deserve relationships where respect is real, not wrapped in strategic sweetness. Because your worth isn't defined by how loudly someone praises you. It's defined by how deeply you respect yourself when the room is silent. Part 10. They make you feel guilty for setting boundaries. Here's a hard truth most people avoid. Some of the most manipulative people in your life won't scream at your no. They'll whisper guilt. They'll frown just enough to make you second-guess yourself. They won't say you're wrong for protecting your space. They'll just make you feel bad for doing it. And if you're not careful, You'll start believing that drawing a line is the same as hurting someone. But boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are clarity. They are the language of self-respect. And anyone who makes you feel guilty for setting them never really respected you in the first place. They respected your compliance, your availability, your willingness to bend, but the moment you shift from pleasing to protecting, the energy changes, their tone shifts, the warmth fades, and suddenly, you're the problem, not because you were unkind, but because you dared to be firm. Stoicism teaches us that freedom begins at the edge of our own choices. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And being master of yourself means deciding where your time, energy, and attention go, and refusing to hand them over on demand. You do not exist to be endlessly available. You do not owe your peace to people who interpret your boundaries as betrayal. I've been there, saying yes with a tight chest and a forced smile. Feeling guilty for canceling something I never wanted to agree to in the first place. Wondering if I was selfish for needing space. And every time, the guilt came faster than the boundary. Because when you're used to overgiving, choosing yourself feels like a sin. But here's what I've learned. People who are truly in your corner will celebrate your growth. Not punish it. They will hear, know, and respect it. They won't need you to explain your every limit. They'll honor it, because they honor you. When someone tries to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself, it's not about you. It's about their loss of access. They were counting on your silence, your softness, your exhaustion, and when you disrupt that pattern with one powerful word, no, they have to face the truth. The version of you they were using no longer exists. So how do you stand firm in your boundaries without carrying the guilt? You remember why they're there. You remember what happened the last time you didn't set one. You remember the burnout, the resentment, the frustration you swallowed just to keep the peace. And you remind yourself, peace without honesty isn't peace. It's performance. You are not difficult for having needs. You are not selfish for taking up space. You are not heartless for saying, "This is where I end," and someone else begins. That is maturity. That is emotional responsibility. That is what it means to live aligned with your values, not other people's convenience. The next time someone pushes back on your boundary with guilt, pause, breathe, and say to yourself, "Their discomfort is not my burden. My boundaries are not up for debate." Because the people who belong in your life will never ask you to shrink to stay in it. They'll grow with you. They'll adjust with you. They'll listen when you say, "I can't," and most importantly, they'll respect you more, not less, for standing tall in your truth. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to convince someone that your needs are valid. You just have to believe that protecting your peace is a birthright, not a negotiation. Because when you set boundaries without guilt, you stop managing people's comfort. And you start living in your own truth. And that, my friend, is where real power begins. Because when you set boundaries without guilt, you stop managing people's comfort. And you start living in your own truth. And that, my friend, is where real power begins. Thank you for spending this time with me here on the Chill Stoic. If this message helped you feel a little stronger, a little clearer, or a little more at peace, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You just have to stay rooted in your truth, even when the world tries to pull you away from it. Until next time, stay calm, stay grounded, and stay stoic.